Hey guys, how's it going? This is Kevin Asani, and you are watching the Progressive Square. Today is our 6th episode, and I am so glad to be with you guys, and I'm hoping you're gonna check this episode out. And if you guys want to leave comments on the live show, or you want to, whether it's on Facebook Live or it's on Periscope, feel free, and I'll try and answer or respond to any things that you guys got to say during the show. So we got a full docket of interesting stories to cover here. And right before we get started, I just wanted to let you guys know to please check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/ProgBlacksmith, ProgBlacksmith. If you guys could please contribute, become a patron. $1, $2, $3, any amount would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so let's get to the first story here of the show. First thing we're going to be covering is a story about Joe Biden. Apparently, he isn't campaigning too much, which is interesting. The team Biden, the Biden campaign, is trying to keep him from as much limited exposure, or trying to limit his exposure as much as possible, and trying to keep him out of the spotlight. It seems like a very similar strategy to what Hillary Clinton was doing back in 2016. So I think it's a smart strategy, because Joe Biden, it seems like anytime he's put himself into the limelight, or kind of put himself out there and try to expose himself more, he actually ironically ends up exposing himself. So it turns out it is a good strategy, but at the same time, it's a very sneaky strategy. So I'm going to read an article here from the Washington Post, and it's just going to give you a quick breakdown of everything that's kind of going on regarding the different steps that the campaign is taking and everything. So let's take a look here. The title of the article is Joe Biden's Campaign of Limited Exposure. How long can he keep it up? So let's see. The article is from May 26th, and let's read a couple of the first paragraphs here. It says, Senator Bernie Sanders plans to enjoy ice cream with New Hampshire voters to celebrate Memorial Day. He won't be far from former Maryland Governor John Delaney, another presidential candidate who's in the midst of his 19th trip to the state and plans an itinerary that includes 4 barbecues, 1 parade, and a wreath laying. In Iowa, Senator Cory Booker, a Democrat of New Jersey, is rolling through the cornfields in an RV, while Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat of New York, unveils a family bill of rights and tours an ethanol plant. And here's former Vice President Joe Biden's agenda for the holiday weekend, according to his campaign. Joe Biden has no public events scheduled. Let's see. It says, those 7 words are becoming familiar for the Biden team. Aside from a campaign swing right after announcing his candidacy, Biden has kept his head down while his rivals rush from state to state, even when he has held public events. They have included only a handful of questions from voters or reporters. The light public schedule reflects the unique position of his campaign, advisors say. With near universal name recognition and high favorability ratings among Democrats, the former vice president does not need to introduce himself to voters like nearly every other candidate, and as the leader in early polls, he can attract media attention without splashy events. So let's put a pause. Let's take a pause for a second and reflect upon how sneaky that is. Again, I use the word sneaky because it is sneaky. Because what Joe Biden wants to do is he wants to make sure that if he exposes himself too much, he might end up slipping up and doing something weird or doing something awkward and getting a lot of press attention that will bring his poll numbers down. As they mentioned in the article here, he has, quote, near universal name recognition and high favorability ratings among Democrats. Now, I think ultimately Democrats are not going to like necessarily get to the point of like, oh, I can't stand Joe Biden. I don't want to, have anything to do with Joe Biden. I don't think that's not the strategy a lot of Democrats are taking. I read an article for you guys. I think it was either the last episode or the episode after. Yeah, I think it was the fourth episode we did, where, black Democrats were like, oh yeah, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is going to be a great team. That's totally what we're looking forward to. And, the Congressional Black Caucus and everything talking about how they, would love them as a team because they love Joe Biden and then they want him to run with a woman of color. So, in this case, it's just like, this is just a matter of like keeping him out of the limelight in the case when in the scenario that possible like independent vote, well, not so much independent voters, but like kind of like Democrats that are not leaning towards Joe Biden, not wanting to have anything to do with him. And there are going to be, there might be a great deal of independents that, they don't really like the Democratic Party, but they don't want to vote for Trump. And they do want to have some, they do want to get involved in the two-party system, unfortunately. And I say that to some extent because I obviously am a supporter of Bernie Sanders, and he is running as a Democrat. So I get registering as a Democrat. But I'm just in the context of being like a loyalist to the Democratic Party, that's always something I have an issue with because I think people can do much better than that. But I think that's kind of a different that's a conversation for another day. But when it comes to the kind of the general landscape of people that want to be a part of the party, but they're not like loyalists to the party. A lot of those people are going to be like, oh, well, I don't know. Am I going to vote for Biden? Am I going to vote for, Kamala Harris? Am I going to vote for Bernie? And am I going to vote for, Elizabeth Warren? People are going to be jumping around. They're really not going to know where they want to be. So this is kind of a scenario where people have to kind of, they're going to have to choose one or the other. And honestly, I don't think Biden is going to be the person they're going to go to as that first option, considering the fact that he's been around forever, and he's on the older side. His ideas are kind of sucky, obviously. Not even kind of sucky, they're very sucky. But a lot of people will be like, yeah, well, it's not that bad because he was Obama's VP and all. So people I'm just trying to look at it in the kind of the scenario of how kind of like from the perspective of how your kind of typical Democratic voter will look at it. Again, the independent type Democrats won't look at it like that. Independent type Democrats are going to be like, I would look at like a Bernie Sanders or a Elizabeth Warren, possibly even Tulsi Gabbard or Mike Gravel or somebody, or even Andrew Yang. So there's going to be a lot of different scenarios for, independent type thinking people out there. So let's continue on with the article. It says here, but there are risks. Voters in the early primary states, especially Iowa, with its caucus system that rewards on-the-ground organizing, want to see the candidates personally and often. And there is the danger that Biden's schedule could reinforce a word President Trump is already using to describe his candidacy: sleepy. Biden's campaign says that's not going to happen. Quote, I have zero worry that any voter will leave a Joe Biden event with doubts about his energy, said Kate Bedingfield, his deputy campaign manager. They're going to see it everywhere he goes. Well, apparently he's not really going anywhere because he's not campaigning very much. So, okay. I mean, like the limited amount of times that they're going to be seeing him, I guess they could be excited. But I mean, at the same time, what's going to make you excited to see Joe Biden when you barely ever see him? But okay. It says Biden spends 30 minutes to an hour getting voters greeting voters on a rope line after his public events, Bedingfield said. But after a short burst of activity in the early primary states, his schedule the past 2 weeks or so has mostly involved fundraisers, which, while publicly announced and attended by a poll reporter, are far different from open campaign events. And I think a lot of those, I'm pretty sure a lot of those fundraisers and stuff are not like, they're not on camera, so no, there isn't like a reporter in the back, so there isn't like a camera type reporter. So there's going to be a reporter like writing stuff down and taking notes and stuff, but there isn't going to be like a guy with like a camera, standing there and taping everything. The only people that really do that are the people that are part of that fundraiser, and then they may want to tape it just for their, for their own pleasure, I guess. But as far as like outside groups, like as far as journalists go and reporters, they're not going to, they're not going to let those people have very much access. The amount of access that's going to be, allowed for these fundraisers is so tiny. It's limited because they know that if they allow in too much, then obviously too much is going to get exposed. And it goes right back to the talking point that Joe Biden doesn't want to be exposed too much, So, it says here, attended by pool. Yeah. So it says here, it's not clear how long Biden can continue to limit his public exposure in this way. The first Democratic debate is June 26th and 27th, and Biden will share the stage with 9 rivals and a moderator, each eager to press him on his positions and record. Other debates follow, while influential groups ranging from labor unions to ethnic organizations are hosting multi-candidate events and may not take kindly to being skipped. Yeah, that's actually a good point, because you can't, like, when it gets to the point where you're like picking and choosing your events, and then you even end up picking and choosing like union events, and then specific like they said, ethnic organizations. So let's say if like there's like an NAACP event or something, like you want to attract black voters, right? So you're not going to go, you're not going to be like, oh no, sorry, I can't make it there, because then you're going to turn off the black voting base, essentially. Let's say if there's like there's a Latino or Latina event. So depending, if it's like more of a woman, kind of a female themed type, Hispanic event, that would be a problem. The Latino event, same. Like it's you want to attract those specific type of voters. But obviously, it seems like Joe Biden is all about fundraising right now, so he doesn't really care about appealing to certain kinds of voters unless they're giving him money. So unless you're getting the money out of them, then he doesn't give a shit. At the end of the day, he just cares about filling up his coffers, essentially. It says, for now, however, the strategy appears to be working. Biden's carefully crafted 3-part campaign launch went off without an obvious hitch, and the polls so far give him a comfortable lead in the fractured field of 23 Democratic contenders. Now you have to remember, this is super early in this campaign, and it's barely the campaigning has started, but like again, they said, we haven't even had a debate yet. So what does that say? It says a lot when you haven't even had a debate yet. You haven't had like any kind of like, sit down type of events. I think there was one that was like done at like a black female event or something, a black female kind of themed event. There, I don't know. I think Joyanne Reid from MSNBC was there, and then they were like heckling Bernie Sanders and then cheering Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren. But so that kind of event was like the candidates actually sitting down individually and having conversations. Now, when it comes to the candidates sitting individually, obviously, then it becomes a debate. So that those kind of things, again, have not happened. But again, they do sit and have conversations with like different, like I said, different reporters or like the heads of different groups and stuff. So, and then like, I don't know, hosts of cable news shows, obviously. So yeah, that kind of stuff happens, but not the sit down with like other candidates for sure. It says some Democratic strategists say Biden may be limiting his participation in freewheeling campaign sessions, partly to play down the fact that he is older than the figure they may remember. Quote, voters are going into events with him expecting Uncle Joe, but they come out having seen Grandpa Joe, said Rebecca Katz, a Democratic strategist who favors liberal candidates but is not working for a presidential campaign. I believe Rebecca Cass was a supporter of Bernie in 2016. I could be wrong. I remember seeing her on Twitter before. It says, since entering the race 4 weeks ago, Biden has held 11 public events, according to his campaign. Former Congressman Beto O'Rourke of Texas had nearly 4 times that number in the same period, according to the schedules. And Gillibrand, who is lagging in the polls, planned 11 stops in Iowa just over the holiday weekend. Elizabeth Warren has shown her face to the public at 27 events in the 4 weeks since Biden entered the race. Booker has had at least 27 events scheduled in the same time span, and Sanders has had at least 17 announced engagements. And with the exception of O'Rourke, and unlike Biden, all of those candidates have full-time jobs in the Senate that keep them tethered to Washington most weeks. That's actually a really good point, because you got to consider the fact that they can't just leave. They can't just leave their obviously their job that they got to do on a hopefully daily basis. Obviously have to work at least 8, 10, 12 hours a week, 8 to 12 hours a day, I'm guessing. Although they do get a lot of, just like in general, Congress gets a lot of breaks. They get a lot of vacations. And I'm sure obviously there was a vacation for Memorial Day, but I would be surprised if it was like a longer vacation, like if they left a little bit earlier so that they could go and campaign. So that's a big deal. Bernie's in the Senate, Booker, Warren, Kamala, Gillibrand, all of them, they're all in the Senate. O'Rourke is not in the Congress anymore. Obviously, he lost his Senate race to Ted Cruz, so he's not there either, obviously. So he's already out. O'Rourke and Biden are pretty much, they have tons of time. Same with Buttigieg, too. Let's see. Advisors say Biden's public schedule reflects a thought-out strategic choice. The candidate's time is better spent on vital but less public activities, they say, such as fundraising, one-on-one calls, policy development, and the building of a campaign infrastructure. A lot of that is just code word for the fact that he just doesn't want to be out in the public. So, once you see the fundraising, then it's like, honestly, I think fundraising is probably a majority of what he's doing. One-on-one calls, who would he be having one-on-one calls with? It's not like he's talking to some regular Joe on the phone, like, hey, Joe, obviously his name is Joe, but regular type person out there, John, Joe, Bob, whatever, talking to him on the phone and be like, yeah, what do you think about, what would you like for me to push for? What kind of policies do you advocate for? So Joe Biden doesn't give a fuck what Bob, from fucking Ohio thinks. So, I don't understand what the one-on-one calls mean. Maybe I'm just not familiar with what that refers to. Policy development just means putting together policies, which you should have already done, and I guarantee Joe Biden is it's pretty thin on the policy, I would say. He's pretty much either he's either copying whatever Obama did in 2008 and 2012. And he's just using it for now, I guess. And I've also noticed, many people have noted on Twitter, that a lot of times his campaign ideas, they're copying Bernie Sanders. I think one of the things he was copying Bernie Sanders on was, what was it? I think it was something about pre-K or something, some universal pre-K or something like that. I gotta look it up again. Maybe I can check it during the show, or not. You guys can go check that out for me and let me know. But and then the last part says the building of campaign infrastructure. Again, that's just code word for just putting together the campaign. But you should have already done that. So that doesn't. A lot of these are excuses. Doesn't seem to honestly make a lot of sense. The last part here says, the next paragraph here says, it's definitely an advantage that he can pace himself and do events that matter rather than just doing events that traditionally are used to prove yourself, said Larry Raskey, who worked on Biden's earlier presidential campaigns but has no formal role this time around. He's in a different place than the other candidates. But see, that's just, if you're using that mentality, then you're just assuming that, okay, well, I've already won, or not won, but I'm already ahead, so I don't need to do any work. And he probably thinks he has already won. Like, he wants to be anointed just like Hillary was in 2016. But in Biden's mind, he's like, oh yeah, I'm already ahead of the polls. I'm already doing great. I'm not putting myself out there too much. My campaign tells me not to do that. So yeah, I'm in great shape. I don't have to go there, talk to anybody, do any of the hard work. I don't have to do any of the heavy lifting. All the heavy lifting is being done in his mind, is being done by all the other candidates, who at least the ones that are campaigning a lot. So, and to be fair, when it comes to the other candidates, I mean, aside from Bernie Sanders, all the other candidates are they're not very well known. I mean, maybe outside of I would say probably Elizabeth Warren. Maybe, I don't know who else is there. I mean, outside of Biden, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, who else is well known in this campaign? You know what I'm saying? There's nobody almost. Like, those are the three main names those are the three names that you hear the most from. At least in the media and kind of on a general standpoint. You hear from Biden, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren. And those, I think, to a certain extent, not all of them, obviously. Like, I think Warren is less of a household name than Bernie and Biden is. Biden is definitely much more of a household name than Bernie, but Bernie is in between Biden and Warren, because he ran in 2016, and obviously he's had a lot of exposure. Obviously, he had the exposure in 2016. He has had tons of exposure since. A lot has been focused on his like we talked about last week, I think it was, or a week before that, about his, the Yemen resolution, the War Powers Act, and, pushing for different policies. Obviously, he's pushing his Medicare for All really hard. So there's a lot of situations where Biden is out there and he's being noted. I'm sorry, Bernie is out there and being noticed, but it's a little bit of a different thing than Warren. I think Warren is just more known for the fact that she is, I think, because, she was involved in, the Consumer Financial Protection, what was it? The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Sorry. So that was an important thing that was done under Obama. So, she might have gotten that. This was before she was in the Senate. So she got quite a bit of attention for that. Obviously, Obama really liked that and he pushed it and everything. So, she probably got a decent amount of attention for that, and pretty much seems like anybody at any point that is attached at the hip to Barack Obama, they get a lot of attention among Democratic loyalist voters, because Obama was a Democratic loyalist himself, and whether it's Hillary Clinton, whether it's, again, like I said, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, there aren't really that many others. So yeah, when it comes to those kind of people, for sure, they're going to be noticed by the main players out there. So, or at least the main voters. I mean, the main voters out there, and they're going to be considered as main players. So yeah, the rest of the article just kind of goes on and just talks about the groups that, are kind of campaigning, like they're talking about MoveOn.org. They're not, how he's not coming to a MoveOn.org event, and, has Biden done a town hall yet? I don't know, but they're mentioning here how a lot of the cable networks have been holding town halls. It says he has given no indication that he wants to take part in one. That's very interesting. Wow. You would think he would want to take the town hall, because the town halls are very scripted. I mean, but then again, town halls lately these days, especially the ones on CNN, have been getting caught for putting plants where specific Democratic operatives are basically asking questions. They got caught for that for doing with Bernie, for sure. One of the events in Washington D.C. a while back. Yeah, so I think I think what they are thinking, I think what the Democratic Party and to an extent Biden is thinking, he doesn't on top of the fact that he obviously doesn't want to put his name out there, he also doesn't want to, he doesn't want to get caught for maybe he doesn't want to be caught for showing that there's a bias, you know what I'm saying, kind of in the whole context of the Democratic Party being biased in favor of Biden. I don't think they really care, though. I don't think the whole kind of Democratic plants being in town hall events matters. So I don't think that would make that much of a difference as far as like a certain campaign or candidate strategy to take part in one of these town halls. So, but I think it's definitely becoming an epidemic, and certainly the DNC is focused for sure because they don't want to get caught as much because they don't want to. I know they don't want to be seen to be they don't want to be seen as favorably to be showing as much favorability as they clearly are. So, there's another quote here from his deputy advisor, campaign manager, whatever. Says there's a tremendous amount of the town halls or whatever events, I guess. The organizers of the events understandably try to create a sense that missing their event is the biggest mistake that a candidate can make, but there is a countless number of these in any given week. And you have to be smart about how you're spending your time and where you're going. Okay, see, like that, again, that's just code word for, like, I don't want to be out there as much. Here it says they're putting Jill Biden out more. Yeah, it definitely seems like they're putting Jill Biden out there more to kind of make, like, to like show like how, you know, wonderful he is because she's, you know, that's his wife, and even though honestly she's not really helping him all that much, especially when she was making the comments regarding Anita Hill and how we have to move on from Anita Hill. So I mean, Joe Biden's not really helping, but Joe Biden as much as people may think, but they'd probably rather have her out there more than him, at least right now. Robbie Mook, the fucking fraud that ran Hillary's campaign in 2016, he says, the upside for frontrunners, they are always going to be covered. The curse of always being covered is not always what you want it to be about. Yeah, I guess, but he says it tends to be much more about the process of the campaign. We have not seen Biden yet. He has a lot of history here, though, said Sarah Mahler, chair of the Washoe County Democrats in Nevada. A lot of us have our pictures with him or some story with him. Okay. So yeah, so that's pretty much the article. I mean, it seems like a lot of people that are obviously like part of the Democratic Party, they're okay with Joe Biden not exposing himself very much. Like, they're okay with the lack of exposure, which is a problem. I think that's serious. Like, that's seriously, like, as usual, there's problems with the Democratic Party. There's a problem with these mainstream parties, whether it's Republican or Democrat. But, like, that whole, like, you know, front-runner status thing, like, that shouldn't be a reason to keep yourself out. So when you think, like, so that's what I'm saying. Like, it's this arrogance. It's like, oh, you know, I'm the front runner. Like, you know, I don't need to show myself to you. Who are you? You know, fuck off. I'm gonna do whatever I want. Honestly, that ends up, you know, working to your disadvantage. So listen, if Joe Biden wants to do that, that's gonna be on him. If he wants to fuck that up, you know, again, if he wants to fuck up second or third or fourth run that he's making, that's all on you, dude. You're gonna fuck it up for yourself, and you're gonna end up paying the price. And that'll just be one less candidate that, you know, Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard and those legitimate candidates out there are going to have to deal with. So I'm cool with it. It's just, I mean, listen, I'm trying to help you out, dog. So if you don't want to listen to me, listen to my good advice, then that's fine with me. I could care less. I didn't want Biden in this campaign to begin with, obviously. So, and neither do a lot of progressives, obviously. So let's check out the next story here. So this one is going to be about Bernie Sanders, and it is an article about how Bernie Sanders is supposedly playing the spoiler for the Democratic Party, and how the Democrats, in their eternal hatred for Bernie Sanders, can't stand the fact that he might not, even though he might not endorse the candidate that's going to be running or that's going to be the eventual nominee running in 2020. So, I mean, I don't really understand their paranoia, but at the same time, it's like, what they're basically saying is they're trying to get Bernie in line, and trying to say, like, listen, you better do what we tell you, or else, then you're gonna suffer the consequences of, I don't know what those consequences are gonna be, we're just gonna blame you, I guess. So it's just gonna be more of the same thing from 2016, basically. So, like, they want to threaten and shit, they want to, talk shit, and, try and, put out all this stuff out there about how they're gonna, whip Bernie into shape and make him do the things that they want him to do. But at the end of the day, you're not going to make Bernie Sanders or his supporters like myself and other people I know out there make them do anything that they don't want to do. So anyway, let's get to the article here. It says, the title of the article is Democrats worry Bernie Sanders could play spoiler. And this is from The Hill. They say Democrats are worried that if he doesn't win the party's presidential nomination himself, Senator Bernie Sanders will be a thorn in the side of the Democratic nominee for president, especially if it's former Vice President Joe Biden. The Democrats worry that Sanders won't be a team player if he loses, and that he and his supporters will be particularly problematic if Biden or another rival seen as out of step with progressives comes out on top. Quoting an aide to a Democratic senator, I think Bernie will do everything in his power to elevate himself by pushing others down. Wow, yeah, that evil Bernie Sanders. He's got such an ego. He's got such an ego to put everybody else down and trying to up his status for what? For pushing better policies? I mean, that's ultimately what it's really about. The way they want to frame it and characterize it as, oh, Bernie's all about his ego and all about his, about himself. No, he's trying to get himself onto the stage, on the bigger stage and into the spotlight so that he can push his policies, not make himself rich. That's what Biden and Hillary and all these other people want to. So stop trying to pretend like Bernie Sanders is like all your other hacky ass, hacky fucking, greed, attention whore type candidates. That's not what he is, and he's never shown that to himself to be like that. It says a senior aide to a second Democratic senator said concerns about Sanders dividing the party next year are widely held, even though everyone in the Senate Democratic Conference is holding their tongue for fear of making things even worse. The aide said that when it comes to Sanders, there is a concern among Biden supporters that, quote, this guy is going to play spoiler again, end quote. The worries follow a bitter 2016 primary fight between Sanders and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who won the nomination and then was defeated by President Trump in the electoral college. Obviously, because she won the popular vote. Some Democrats have blamed Sanders in part for that outcome, arguing he stayed in the primary against Clinton too long and that he did not do enough to bring his supporters on board in November. Okay, so first of all, Bernie Sanders, yes, did wait a long time until he endorsed Hillary Clinton. He waited until after the primary, or was it? I'm sorry, it was right before the primary that he endorsed her, and then during the convention, I could be wrong on it. He may have endorsed her after the convention. No, it was during. I'm sorry, it was before I'm gonna have to check that. I could be wrong. I mean, if I'm wrong, then whatever, I'm wrong. But, I definitely know he endorsed her. I can't remember the specific period of time, but I definitely know that he pushed for her, gave a speech at the convention and said, Hillary Clinton's the nominee. He even, declared himself. He even declared his state, his state of Vermont as coming out in favor of Hillary Clinton. Gave that, it was kind of like an emotional thing where, oh my God, Bernie did it, and then everybody was kind of like happy and cheering and whatever. I mean, most of the obviously Democratic Party was happy with that. The rest of us didn't really care for it, but at the same time we were kind of like, okay, Bernie, he's doing the right thing for the party. And he, obviously, doing what he promised. But honestly, deep down, a lot of us are like, fuck that shit. We don't want to have anybody that we like, supporting Hillary Clinton, and that's kind of an issue. But it's, at the same time, ultimately, in my mind at least, it depends on the policy. The policy matters. If you're, endorsing Hillary Clinton, that's not as big of a problem as, oh, I'm going to change my policies and they're going to be the complete opposite of what I've always pushed for. So if Bernie Sanders is going out there and pushing for the right policies, I'm okay with it as long as he sticks to that. And then if he endorses somebody, then I don't know. Then I guess he endorses somebody. That doesn't mean we're going to endorse. See, that's the problem. So just like this, article is pointing out, they're talking about how, well, they're so worried about his supporters, and they're so worried that he can't bring his supporters on board. Yeah, you better be worried, because we're not going to support somebody just because, Bernie Sanders tells us to. It doesn't work like that. And all these, people that hate Bernie Sanders act like especially the people that are on, they're kind of on the, social media, and they're just kind of like carnival barkers, essentially, on social media, and they just talk shit. They're always like, well, the cult of Bernie, the people that love Bernie Sanders no matter what. Listen, dude, we don't listen to everything Bernie Sanders tells us. If he's wrong about something or we disagree with him on something, we say we don't agree. And it's not as simple as just it's not as simple as just okay, whatever Bernie tells us to jump and we ask how high. It doesn't work like that. The irony is that that's how they think that's how they operate with their own candidates. So their own, whatever, Hillary Clinton or this and that, in their mind, it's oh, well, we would do it for our candidate, but they don't do it for theirs, which is bullshit. And it's ironic because in 2008, Hillary Clinton's supporters, 24% of them did not vote for Barack Obama in 2008. Now, in 2000, that's about 60, that's about 70, so I guess we could assume that 76% of them did vote for Barack Obama. Guess what percentage of Bernie Sanders voters voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016? 80%, at least. 80%. Some say it's even maybe up to 90%. So it's somewhere between 80 and 90% that ultimately did end up voting for Hillary Clinton. I've seen many voters like that too, who are like, yeah, I love Bernie, but I voted for Hillary in 2016. I personally did not vote for her. I voted for Jill Stein. I know a lot of other people that also voted for Jill Stein. And I applaud them for that because, there's nothing wrong with voting for third party. There's nothing wrong with taking part in democracy. So the people that hate that, they just hate democracy. That's really what it is. But they don't realize, and they obviously don't want to admit it. But all the talk about how Bernie Sanders supporters didn't come out for Hillary is bullshit, and the fact that these people are whining about their supporters, the Bernie Sanders supporters not coming out for the next candidate. I mean, honestly, it's bullshit, but at the same time, it's if they don't, then they don't. They did it against Hillary. I don't know if they're going to do it this time. I don't know. I know I'm not going to do it, but I mean, I'm not speaking for all Bernie Sanders supporters, though. But when it comes to, all Bernie Sanders on a general, just kind of general landscape, they will. I mean, I believe they will. Majority of them, I think they will. It won't just be a plurality of them. It's going to be a majority of them. Because, ultimately, a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters do realize that the threat of Trump is big. But, again, I'm not going to be one of them. The majority of the people that I know are not going to do the same thing as what majority of Bernie Sanders supporters did in 2016 and what I believe majority of them will do in 2020 if he's not the nominee. But that's just my contention. I could be wrong. So, it says, for their part, Sanders supporters are suspicious of a Democratic establishment they think rigged the game against the candidate in 2016. Not only do we think it, we've proven it. So, I mean, it's obvious how biased the campaign, the DNC was against Bernie Sanders. They were allowing questions to be asked that hosts of so-called news shows knew about, and then they would, give it to the Hillary Clinton campaign, so they would basically know what the questions are before anybody else knew them. And then there was talks about throwing people off of voter rolls and shit. I think that happened in California. The time to register as a Democrat was also very limited. I think that happened in New York, where people couldn't, like, there had been a deadline. The deadline was so early for people to change to become Democrats from whatever, I don't know, independent to Democrat, I guess. So that was a big problem as well. So we are very justified in believing that that it might be rigged, that it was rigged, and that it's going to be rigged again. It also says they also say those rigging their hands over Sanders are being disrespectful by assuming he won't win. They note he isn't far behind Biden in national polls or those in Iowa and New Hampshire. Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat of California and national co-chair of Sanders' campaign, said he has a very good chance of being the nominee. His support is remarkably stable, and he continues to attract huge crowds. He has a very committed base. I anticipate he's going to do very well in Iowa and New Hampshire, he said. And if he's not the nominee, just like anyone who's not the nominee, I guarantee you he and people around him will go all in to support whoever the nominee is. I don't think we're not going to go all in. Let me just tell you this. No Bernie Sanders supporters is going to go all in, quotes, for Joe Biden, for, I would say to some extent, Elizabeth Warren. Although I think there is a lot of crossover between, Warren voters and Bernie Sanders voters, unfortunately, because of how Elizabeth Warren has become, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other progressives, has become much more establishment. And, but I can see some people, like, if Elizabeth Warren is the nominee, they would, I feel like more people that were willing to vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016, I think more of them would be willing to vote for Elizabeth Warren if she's the nominee. Not Joe Biden, though. Joe Biden is like the antithesis. He is the complete antithesis of Bernie Sanders. So, if they're worried about that, then they're fine to be worried about that, because Joe Biden is a horrible option, ultimately. It says here, Ben Tolchin, Sanders' campaign pollster, accused Democrats of underestimating Sanders, noting that Biden's poll numbers drifted downward from December to mid-April when he announced his candidacy before he got a bump. He got a bounce from getting in, he said, but there's no reason if those voters left him once before, they won't leave him again. In any event, Tolchin said that if Sanders does fall short, he's committed to beating Trump. A driving force for a lot of Democratic primary voters is the desire to beat Trump. Bernie shares that desire and says his number one goal is defeating Trump. He obviously hopes to be the nominee, but he'll get behind any person who is out there. I think we'll have a very unified party. Yeah, I don't like to echo any of that kind of we're unified kind of bullshit. But, that's what these Democratic operatives and stuff are supposed to say, whether they're working for Bernie or not. That's what they say, it seems like. Unless it's like one of his closest advisors, like, those people are a little bit more, I would say divisive in a way, but they're kind of like, they kind of don't want to, they're too stubborn. They don't want to admit those kind of things right away. I think Jeff Weaver, who was working on as the campaign manager of Bernie Sanders in 2016, I think he's a senior advisor now, so he doesn't have as big of a role for 2020. But Jeff Weaver was very defiant in 2016 when it came to the whole, like, is Bernie Sanders going to drop out? Is he going to endorse Hillary and all that stuff? And Weaver a lot of times was just like, he was basically telling the people that would ask those questions to piss off. And he was very defiant to the reporters and the journalists out there who were asking those questions. And I think to some extent that's what Bernie believed too, but Bernie didn't want to say it, so he let his campaign manager to say it. So it says Sanders has loyal supporters and a proven fundraising track record, leading many of his colleagues to believe he will be in the race for the long haul. It says, the question is, how much resiliency do you have, said one Democratic senator, who then questioned whether candidates such as former Representative Beto O'Rourke and South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg will retain support if they falter in polls. Can you keep on going back to people for donations? The Democratic senator asked. That's what I think Bernie has. I don't know for the others like Buttigieg and Beto. I wonder if that's a Democrat that endorsed him, because there was who was that one Democrat that endorsed him from? I forgot which state it was. Was it Vermont? But Patrick Leahy, yeah, that's the senator that I was thinking about. Peter Welsh is another one. He's in the Congress. Yeah, so he's in Congress. He's the at-large Vermont congressman. So he's the only congressman representing Vermont. Yeah, I think that senator might have been Patrick Leahy that they're referring to. It would be weird, though. You would think Patrick Leahy would be, coming out and, saying, yeah, I support Bernie. So basically you would think in this case, you would think that, they would be identifying him instead of just saying a Democratic senator. But I don't know. Maybe he just wants to stay anonymous. But I would think that's the senator that they're referring to. That I just quoted in this article. Because he's the only senator that has openly endorsed Bernie Sanders, senator, not congressman. So, it says Sanders has seen a dip in support, according to polls. A Morning Consult poll from earlier this month found that Sanders' support among people ages 18 to 29 dropped from 45% in March to 33% in May. And a recent Monmouth University poll showed Sanders' support among Democratic-leaning voters dropped from 25% in March to 20% in April to 15% in its latest survey. I think a lot of the drop in support among these various polls, it probably has to do with the fact that more and more candidates are being added. So I wouldn't, we're way too early in this campaign. So I don't really I wouldn't be panicking. I'm not panicking, but I wouldn't be panicking if I was Bernie yet, because again, you have to get into a debate. You have to have a primary. You haven't even had a primary. The primary is going to be in January. None of these things have happened. So you have to have a debate. You have to go through the primary, at least the first primary or first couple primaries, and then you can see what happens. Because a lot of people are talking about how, the New Hampshire primary where Bernie Sanders did really well, he's not doing very well because Biden is ahead by 20 points or 30 points or whatever it says. 18 points, I think it says. But yeah, it's way too early to make any kind of, predictions or get paranoid about anything. At the end of the day, you're gonna have drops in polls. So I don't know. But I'm not too worried about it. It says the loyal base of supporters, however, could prevent Sanders from falling too far, say Democratic lawmakers. This could be particularly helpful in the large Democratic field, which includes 24 candidates. There are also questions among Democrats about whether Biden can retain his pole position. Yeah. Seems like that's it. It says if Biden collapsed, it would be a boon to Sanders, who has consistently placed second in recent Democratic primary polls. Jim Kessler, former aide to Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer and Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way, a centrist Democratic think tank, said he has heard concerns about Sanders becoming a thorny problem for the party's eventual nominee. I expect him to stay in the race all the way until the end for a couple of reasons. One is he did it last time, and he stayed in well beyond the point where there was any doubt about the outcome, he said. He'll raise enough money to do so. He's never been loyal to the Democratic Party, and it remains to be seen how helpful he would be to the Democratic nominee if it's not him in 2020. So one thing these people, it says he wasn't real helpful to Hillary. Okay. Other than the fact that he fucking campaigned for her. But anyway. It says, should his candidacy flounder, the hope is that when it comes time, he bows out gracefully. The stakes are enormous. Yeah, that's what they say every time. Yeah, I don't know. I can't stand this third way group. If you guys haven't heard of Third Way before, Third Way is essentially a pro-corporate establishment group that just pushes like centrist ideas all the time. They pretend like they are like right in the middle as far as like the middle of the country, like what the middle of the country wants, and like, you know, like they're super like moderate and want the things that everybody else wants to know. In reality, they're just pushing for whatever corporatist, you know, establishment ideas that typical Democratic politicians and just politicians in general want. And when he says stuff like he wasn't really helpful to Hillary, then why the fuck did he do 40 campaigns for her? 40 campaign events for her. At one point, he did 14 campaigns in 5 states. He did so much that it got to the point that Rachel Maddow was, you know, praising him for doing so many events for Hillary. So these people just make things up. They just say whatever they have to say to damage Bernie Sanders. That's really what it just comes down to. And the rest of the article just here quotes a couple of quotes another progressive group, Democracy for America, saying that Biden doesn't really have a lot of strength, and that we should watch out for Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren because those people have a little bit more momentum behind them, whereas Biden does not. And Democracy for America, which is actually referred to as DFA, they endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. So I would say they're leaning much more on the progressive side for sure. So that's the article, and you know, these articles going after Bernie Sanders are so typical. I'm going to read you guys another one after this too, but it's so common for these people to talk about how Bernie is not going to be, like, they all already want to declare that Bernie is not going to be the candidate. So they're like, well, is he going to be endorsing? But nothing has happened. Nobody's even won yet. So nobody's won anything yet. Nobody's come across that finish line yet. Yet you're already talking about, is Bernie going to be endorsing? So, okay, so is Joe Biden going to be endorsing? Is Kamala Harris going to be endorsing? Is Elizabeth Warren going to be endorsing? Is Buttigieg, Beto O'Rourke, are those people going to be endorsing? You know? So they don't talk about that kind of stuff. They just worry about Bernie. And so, and then on top of it, when it comes to the whole rigging of the primary thing, why isn't anybody talking about how, Bernie Sanders should be worried about the Democratic Party, rigging the primary again? What is that just like some paranoia coming from us? Because that's what happened. So if you guys are going to be worried about Bernie Sanders not endorsing your shitty candidate, which he's going to do, I promise you, he's going to do that, because, you know, at the end of the day, the most Bernie Sanders is going to do is just going to show some pushback to make sure that specific candidate is pushing for the policies that he advocates for, just like he did with Hillary Clinton. But yes, he ultimately did endorse her, and I'm not surprised that he did so. And he did so because I didn't expect Bernie Sanders to not, especially since he was one of the pretty much the only other candidate left in the race. Of course he would endorse her because he wants to beat Trump too. And he's not like, so the people out there pretending like Bernie is just like Trump, then why is he like going out there and railing against Trump all the time? Why did he endorse Hillary Clinton? Why did he campaign for her and all that stuff? But at the end of the day, we're the ones who should be worried. The progressives should be worried about the primary again being rigged, which it looks like it's going to be, because that's what they're going to do. That's what they're always going to do. Ultimately, the Democratic Party is always going to make sure that their establishment, corporatist candidate is going to get through, no matter who it is, whether it's Kamala, whether it's Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, to some extent, Buttigieg, whoever, Beto O'Rourke, if it's going to be any of these people, Cory Booker. I mean, all these people are all super corporate, and that's all the Democratic Party wants. They want to keep everything the same. And if Bernie Sanders gets in there and he becomes the nominee, they're not going to be happy. Obviously, they'll vote for him. I mean, a good chunk of people are going to vote for Bernie Sanders that, didn't really care for him. I would say probably majority of them, I would say. But because they want to beat Trump. But at the same time, it's kind of like, you don't really know what is going to happen as far as during the primary. So after the primary, whatever. But I mean, during the primary, we definitely have to watch out for this shit being rigged, because it happened in 2016, and with all the corporatists out there talking all this nonsense, we only have more reason to worry. So we have another article here. This one is from CNN. It's written by one of their reporters or journalists, whatever she is. Her name is Nia Malika Henderson. And this one is actually, it's, I noticed this right before I, got on air here. I noticed that the title of this article is almost exactly like the article from Fox News written by a Democratic operative named Mary Ann Marsh. I covered that on the last episode. This is very, very similar to that article. Hold on. See if I can find that article. Just to show you guys the similarities here. Here it is. So let me just give you guys the title of the article that I'm referring to. Mary Ann Marsh, Bernie Sanders' incredible shrinking candidacy. Why he won't be Dem nominee. So that's an opinion piece. May 20th, this person wrote this article for Fox News. Check out the title of this article on CNN and it's not an opinion article. It's not listed because the Fox News article is clearly listed as an opinion article. It says the title of Nia Malika Henderson's article is The Incredible Shrinking, and it says ... Bernie Sanders. Ooh, I don't know. He might be shrinking. So obviously the tone of the article just from the tone of the headline already, and I think the article is going to be the same way, but the tone of the headline is already that Bernie Sanders, he's already faltering and he's not looking good and all that shit. So they're already pushing that fucking narrative. Big surprise. So let's check it out here. It says, last go around, New Hampshire was everything to Bernie Sanders. His one sure thing as he battled Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination. He routinely packed venues with Bernie or bust supporters who saw him as the antidote to the kind of political incrementalism that they thought Clinton embodied. He was 2016's it boy, the grumpy grandpa who was loved by millennials and aging hippies, overwhelmingly white progressives. But 2020 is looking a lot different for Sanders. While he can still raise gobs of money, he has much more company, which leaves the question, who is Sanders without Clinton? Mary Ann Marsh made this same exact argument. And I remember that article, even though it was from a week ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but I at least the specific tidbits of that Mary Ann Marsh article from Fox News. I remember parts, those little tidbits, I remember them because they were so, they were put out there with such, arrogance, And again, I'm going to read through the rest of this article. I don't think this article is going to be as arrogant and as brash in its declarations, but it's asking the same exact questions. It's just putting it into a fake straight newsy, journalistically, style, which is basically just like a journalist putting out they're basically they're manufacturing consent is what they're doing. They're trying to create that narrative so that the people that already hate Bernie Sanders or they're on the fence about this candidate or that candidate, one of them being Bernie, I guess, they want to put it in that mind oh my God, Bernie Sanders, he could already be doing badly or he could already not be a good option because there's 20 other candidates in the race, 20 plus candidates in the race. So let me read the rest here. It says polls, yep, it's early, we know, show Sanders losing support as others such as Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris gain ground. A Monmouth University national poll released last week shows Sanders with the support of 15% of Democratic-leaning voters, a decline of 25% from March. A Monmouth poll of New Hampshire shows Biden with a 20-point lead over Sanders, roughly the same margin he beat Clinton by in the state in 2016. In conversations recently held with about a dozen voters who showed up at his events during his longest New Hampshire swing, it's clear that the kind of ride or die support Sanders had in 2016 has dissipated a bit. To some of his former supporters, he is just another candidate. That sounds exactly like that other article. the revolutionary frontman who launched 1,000 cover bands. Quote, he brought so much into the conversation if he did nothing else, said Felice Burstein, 64, who voted for Sanders in 2016 and recently saw Cory Booker. But I'm on the fence now, exploring. It's too early to tell. I worry that he's older and I'm not sure the country is ready for his ideas. Like, I don't get this. I don't get these people. Listen, I understand these are boomers. My parents are boomers as well. I'm sure I have a lot of other progressives that are trying to convince their boomer parents to vote, to vote for somebody like Bernie Sanders or even Tulsi Gabbard or whatever, or even just pushing for, or just wanting more progressive ideas. But talking about how I'm not sure the country is ready for his ideas. Bernie is not asking for anything radical. He's not, he's pushing for this person, 64 years old. They're almost 65 years old. They're soon to be, or maybe they already are, eligible for Medicare. And Bernie Sanders, and Medicare is very popular, by the way. Bernie Sanders wants to make Medicare for all. He wants to give everybody Medicare. And this is an idea that this 64-year-old woman should be perfectly in favor of. So when you're talking about, I'm not sure if he's ready for the idea, for his ideas. At least you're not saying you're like against him, but at the same time, this person is falling for the propaganda. They're falling for the bullshit, and they're just believing a bunch of lies, honestly, about how like Bernie Sanders can't make it because people are already worried about his ideas. Like, that person is watching too much MSNBC. They're watching way too much CNN, and they're just like they're getting stuck in that same bubble that all these other so-called reporters and Nia Malika Henderson and all these people are in. It says, at a town hall in Concord, which is New Hampshire, Sanders started out his speech citing the reasons he could beat President Donald Trump, among them recent polls showing him leading Trump and his ability to attract young voters to the polls. By the way, Bernie Sanders was ahead by 15 points, by double digits on average, essentially, in 2016, while Hillary Clinton, at the same time, was always ahead by just a few points ahead of Trump, maybe at the most 5 points, but in the lowest she was nearly tied, maybe 2 or 3 points ahead of Donald Trump in the general election polls, whereas Bernie was ahead by 15 points. It's huge. It's like a 3 to 5 times more. So, and then it says the electability question comes up time and time again among Democrats who are desperate to find a candidate who can win the White House. My main concern is his ability to beat Trump and whether he is just speaking to the choir, said Charles Latches, 60 years old, of Concord, who voted for Sanders in the 2016 primary and didn't vote in the general election. What is he going to do in the general with battleground voters? They are going to demonize him and bring up Venezuela and socialism. But my political heart is with Bernie, but I would rather be with somebody who I know can beat Trump. So let's pause there for a second. These people that are worried about the attacks that are going to be launched against Bernie Sanders, these people are not, like, you're not smart. Like, what do you think is going to happen? You think Bernie Sanders is just going to okay, so let's say Bernie Sanders wins the primary, he gets the nomination, and he goes and faces Trump. So what is he going to do? He's going to sit there or stand there on a debate stage with Donald Trump and let Donald Trump just fucking punch him in the throat a million times and talk about Venezuela and talk about socialism, communism, and how, the government takeover and death panels and all the same bullshit they brought up against Barack Obama, who was a fucking centrist, who everybody pretended like he was a socialist and he was a communist and all this far left and shit. Obama was nowhere near that. So they're going to bring up these issues with Bernie Sanders just as much, if not the same level that they're going to bring with any other candidate. They're going to blame. I read you guys an article a couple of weeks ago. It was from CNBC, I believe, where Mike Pence was talking about how Joe Biden is going to bring socialism. He's going to bring socialism to the United States. This is what Joe Biden believed, or says he believes. Or I'm sorry. What Mike Pence believes Joe Biden believes and is going to do. But all of a sudden, we're supposed to believe that, like, oh my God, it's some new strategy that they're going to talk about Venezuela and socialism and government takeover with Bernie Sanders. Now, you can make the case that, yes, the fact that Bernie calls himself a democratic socialist, and that he was much more far left, further to the left when he was younger and in the 1980s, and then he was opposing a lot of wars, and then he was kind of like a hippie and stuff, but all that stuff, and he was pushing for a lot of the legalizing of all drugs and stuff. So like he was pushing for a lot of far left policies. So I guess, to some extent, I guess you could make the case, obviously, that Bernie is going to be further to the left than, of course, obviously further to the left than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris or whatever. But at the same time, you have to realize that they're going to be making this argument with all of these candidates. No candidate is going to be spared from all this fear mongering, the same fear mongering that the Democrats talk about with Russiagate and everything, talking about like, oh, Putin's puppet and this person is controlled by Putin, Trump is, Tulsi Gabbard is, and whatever, we got Russian bots and stuff. Like all the same fear mongering, it exists in both political parties. It exists all throughout our political spectrum and our pathetic, corrupt political system. And it's just, that's the way it is. People are going to push their bullshit just to win a campaign or win a race or, whatever. They're going to do that as much as possible. So the fear that Bernie Sanders is going to do that and then he's just going to stand there and take it, that's the part I can't understand about these people. They just think Bernie Sanders is going to just sit there and take it and not respond? What, as if he can't bring up the fact that Donald Trump is a fascist and, he's, he has all these policies that are racist, and he's anti-immigration, and he's anti-Muslim. He wants to go into, a million different wars. He wants to go to war with Iran. He's threatening China to some extent. He's sort of been threatening North Korea. Yeah, he was definitely threatening North Korea. What did he call Kim Jong-un before? He called him Little Rocket Man or something. This was, I think, in 2018, I think. And so, Trump is doing all kinds of crazy shit too, but then you're worried about about the Republican Party bringing up Venezuela and socialism. This is the problem. These boomers, these idiotic boomers, which again, I will reiterate that a lot of boomers, at least a good chunk of them, are honestly some of the dumbest voters out there because they're so fucking scared of right-wing, in this case, I'm talking about Democratic boomers. They're so worried about right-wing rhetoric. They're so scared of it. They're like, oh my God, what if somebody says something, bad against our candidate? It's like, bro, why don't you just learn about responding? How about you learn about, like, how you can respond to that bullshit? They don't think about that. So, in those, you're not going to have when it comes to Bernie Sanders, he's not going to sit there and take it. He's going to respond, and he's going to call out Trump. And he's going to, just like he called out Hillary Clinton in 2016. Do people not remember that? But all of a sudden, because, Bernie Sanders was able to take on Hillary Clinton, but he's not able to take on Donald Trump, apparently. Because he's going to be scared of Donald Trump? Maybe Hillary Clinton is going to be, because she was. A lot of times she didn't know how the hell to respond to Trump. She would just sit there and just, act like, whatever he's saying, like, shouldn't even be responded to, like, with actual substance. She would just respond with her talking points. Whereas Bernie Sanders can go in there and, he can just, get out of the way and dip and duck and dodge all of Donald Trump's bullshit, and he can respond with actual substance. So Bernie Sanders he's a master of that. He did that against Hillary Clinton, and he's going to do it against Donald Trump, and he's going to be doing it in the primaries as well. So continuing on here, it says, Brian Foley, age 37, of Hudson, New Hampshire, is definitely for Sanders, maybe Elizabeth Warren, and says he has an answer to the socialism question. Quote, every election, Republicans paint Democrats as socialists. We may as well have a socialist this time, he said. That's a good point. Several people described their 2016 vote for Sanders as more of a protest ballot that they cast, knowing that Clinton would likely be the nominee. They suggested that in 2020, practicality would be much more of a factor. As for Sanders, he is certainly aware of the changing dynamics of the race. He huddled with current and former state representatives for a closed-door session before hosting 2 town halls. While his campaign says he isn't focused on the other candidates, he clearly is. He He has hammered Biden the way he hammered Clinton over trade deals and the Iraq War. Sanders, not known for being a good retail politician, has also taken to snapping selfies, something most of the other candidates have been doing for months. We are acting as if last time didn't happen and starting from the ground up, said Carly Stevenson, Sanders' deputy state director. Voters are right to have high standards. We aren't assuming there's a glide path just because we did well last time. Sanders' problem right now is that some of his former voters are acting as if last time didn't happen either. So, basically, the only thing I can say to this particular article, which is not as much of a smear piece as that article from Fox News from the Democratic strategist, but is definitely has the same message to it, not the same tone, but it has the same general message to it. All I can say is that I feel like I'm repeating myself. We have to have a debate. We have to have our first debate here. Bernie has to get his feet wet. If you guys remember when 2016 happened, so when 2016, came, this is basically 2015, before the primaries happened in 2016. Nobody knew who Bernie Sanders was before the debates, And a lot of people, listen, I'm somebody that is involved not in politics, but I'm involved in covering and following politics constantly. I am a political buff. I am a political, extraordinary in the sense that I love to cover it all the time and love to know everything that's going on. That's not always the case with like sports. I love sports, but I'm not covering sports all the time. That's why I'm not doing a podcast about sports. I'm doing a podcast about politics because it's something that I love to cover and I love to get into the intricacies of. So my point is that if I'm following politics all the time, I know what Bernie Sanders stands for. I know what Joe Biden stands for. I know what Hillary Clinton stands for. I know what Warren, Kamala Harris, Kristen Gillibrand, Cory Booker, all these different candidates I know what they believe in because I'm following what they're saying. I'm constantly on Twitter. I'm constantly on social media. I'm always following the news. I know what's going on. Majority of people don't know what's going on with these candidates. So my point is that these people they're not keeping close track of everything. So what you need is a debate. What you need is to have a debate, just as we're going to have, like I said, 26th and 27th of June, so this coming month. So in about less than a month, about 3 weeks or so, there's going to be a debate. Apparently, yeah, it's going to be 26th and 27th, so there's going to be two separate debates because there's so many candidates that obviously can't get 24 candidates on one debate stage. So it'll probably be split into like 9 and 9, I'm guessing. So, or whatever it is, however many, it's going to be 8 and 8. But once you have that debate, people are going to start noticing Bernie Sanders a lot more now, So right now, like what they're doing is they're just saying what the candidates are saying, in speeches. They're seeing what the candidates are saying on cable news shows. They see what they're saying at like their events, their little campaign events, and fundraise or whatever the hell they're doing. Well, the fundraise not so much because, like I said, those aren't even taped. But I mean, like they're big donors. Obviously the big donors at the fundraiser see it. But my point is, people are seeing them alone. It's so much more different when you see candidates standing next to each other and kind of clashing heads and arguing, yelling at each other, responding to somebody's questions like that. I mean, and I'm not a big fan of the debates in the sense that I think a lot of it is just for show. It's almost like, and I think Kyle Kalinske of Secular Talk has referred to it as this, but he refers to the whole idea of like debating, for people as like a WWE event. So when you have like wrestling events, fake wrestling, obviously not real wrestling, but when you have fake wrestling and guys are just going out there, it's basically like, it's pageantry. You know what I'm saying? It's what's the word? It's like a performance. You know what I'm saying? and it's just 2 or 3 or however many, well, in this case, obviously 8 people and 10 people going at it one at a time, just piling on top of each other, just going after each other. Obviously, they go after the main candidate, the top candidate or candidates the most, and they just go after after each other constantly, just hitting each other over the head, blah, blah, blah. Just constantly hitting each other with talking points and rhetoric and attacks and all that stuff. So when it comes to that kind of stuff, that kind of like event, it gets your attention a lot more than it does like a campaign event. Now, when it comes to Bernie Sanders' campaign events, tons of people attend those things. He consistently gets huge crowds. But you have to understand, those are the people that support Bernie Sanders. So if you go to a Bernie Sanders event, you're standing around thousands of other Bernie Sanders supporters. So of course it's going to be, like a bunch of people just like loving what this person is saying, compared to being on a debate stage where, debates happen and then people obviously, they have like, there's always multiple candidates and then all their supporters are sitting in the audience, they're watching, they might be clapping and yelling and taking part in some way, but it's generally, it's kind of a thing where it's all about that specific type of performance and entertaining people in a performance, and just putting on a show, pretty much. And as much as I don't like it to some extent, it can be enjoyable to watch, but at the same time, I don't think a lot of ideas are exchanged, especially when it's going to be so many candidates. But that's what you got to do. Again, you have to get into that debate. You have to do the debates for sure. The debates have to. I'm not advocating against debates. I'm just saying that don't look at the debates as the best opportunity. Don't look at it as the best opportunity for the ideas to be exchanged, but definitely look at it as an opportunity for that candidate to get themselves to the next level, or maybe even falter. Maybe even just go down to the dumps. So have a debate and then just like drop in the bowls because they did so shitty and they just couldn't perform well. So that can happen, but at the same time, you can also obviously do well and then you can get up in the polls. Or maybe you stay where you are and the other person goes down a little bit and then, you're tied with that person. So that could happen between Bernie and Biden, or maybe Elizabeth Warren can go up and tie with Bernie or Biden or something like that, So I'm not really worried about, hearing the idea, me speaking specifically. I am not worried about hearing the ideas from these people because I already know what they're going to say. But I am interested in seeing how they're going to be responded to, not just by the audience, not just by the viewers at home, but also by those other candidates, specifically the candidates that have the best answers. So if you have a Tulsi Gabbard, you have a Bernie, you have a Mike Gravel, if he manages to get on there, Andrew Yang, if he manages to get on there, all these kind of like better candidates that have like more newer, decent, not only newer, but newer and better ideas. I would definitely like to see how those people respond to the more establishment type candidates like Kamala Harris, like Cory Booker, like Joe Biden, to some extent Elizabeth Warren. I don't know, she's obviously got one foot in one camp and one foot down in the other camp as far as ideology, so I still don't know where she is. But, all those establishment candidates, it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to be going up against the lesser establishment candidates. But, at the same time, it could be a bunch of establishment candidates piling onto the one progressive like Bernie Sanders or Tulsi or whatever. So, if it is, then I guess that's what it's going to be. But hopefully, and I know Bernie can hold his own. I know Tulsi Gabbard can hold her own. But at the end of the day, I think Bernie is probably going to do much, much better than he did in 2016 in the debates because he's already gone through this. He just went through it in 2016. He's done tons of town hall events. He's even done town hall events with another candidate too. I think he did it with Ted Cruz one time. He did with somebody else another time, another right-winger. But Bernie loves taking part in these events. As much as I know it's pageantry and I don't love it, he is good at it. He is good at that stuff. So, and hopefully Bernie can thrive. And that's what I'm banking on for sure. So the next issue and the next kind of subject that I wanted to talk about here is the faltering, I wouldn't say faltering, but I would say kind of like the bad kind of turn that is coming about for the so-called resistance. So some of you may or may not know who these people are, but these are people that are involved in kind of the anti-Trump movement. And obviously a lot of them are very kind of like, they're loved by Democratic supporters and voters. They're loved by Democratic loyalists. They're, I would say, largely loved by the media, at least one of the examples that I'm going to bring up. They are. But they are honestly involved in like a very, in what it's called, like it's what they refer to as a grifter movement. So these kind of people are grifters. These are the people that use the movement, this resistance type movement, to benefit their own status. So all these things, like I said before in the last segment, about how everybody acts like Bernie Sanders is like using, elections, or he's using his presidential campaign to up his own status and, become famous and everything. That's not what Bernie Sanders does. And even if he does do it, he's doing it for a good cause because he's pushing for actual policies. What these people that I'm going to be getting to you that I'm going to be kind of, discussing in a second, these people are strictly doing it because they want to up their own status. They want to up their own, their own kind of their reputation, and make themselves famous and make themselves well known among that community of, in this case, other anti-Trump people. So they just love that attention and they want to keep trying to get it. So let's go first with so there's these two brothers. Their names are they're referred to as the Krasensteins. It's two brothers. And one of them is named Ed Krasenstein. The other one is named Brian Krasenstein. Again, for those of you, I think majority of you may not even know who the fuck these people are. These two brothers are essentially like social media, I would say, giants to some extent. And while they're not necessarily like media figures, they're definitely known on social media. So social media, they're not. They're known. Not so much like media like CNN and MSNBC. They don't have TV shows. They're not hosts. I think they're just like, they're figures on social media that like specific people that love to be on Twitter and maybe Facebook. They might be known on Facebook too. But these two brothers, at one point, or at least for a large extent of their time, certainly on Twitter, were very, very well known. Were very, very famous, and they recently got their Twitter accounts suspended and essentially deleted. They got kicked off of Twitter, and they can't be on Twitter anymore. And I'm going to explain to you guys in a second why. It's apparently it's called, I haven't really checked the people that are like, like protesting it or anything, but I'm sure there are people that are like freaking out. They're like, oh my God, how could you do this to the Krasensteins? They're wonderful, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, like in their mind, they're thinking, like the most, as many, not progressive, but as many anti-Trump people as we can get on our, out there in the political atmosphere and arguing politics and, making their voices heard, as much as we can get out there, as that's great. That's what we want to do. So let me just read this quick. What is this? A long article? Yeah, it's pretty long, but I'm just going to go over like kind of the main bullet points here. So the title of the article, and this is from the Daily Beast. The title of the article says, "Feds seized a fortune from the #resistance icons." From #resistance icons accused of boosting online Ponzi schemes. The subheadline says, now Homeland Security investigator alleged reasonable cause to believe Ed and Brian Krasenstein illegally hawked investment scams. It says, in late 2016, federal agents showed up at the Fort Myers, Florida homes of brothers Brian and Edward Krasenstein, seizing computers and financial records and hauling off at least 20 to 30 bundles of stuff. At the time, the story was just a notable blip on local media's crime blotter, but in the 2 years since, the Krasensteins have become more than a pair of local businessmen. Businessmen. They are now prominent members of the online anti-Trump resistance. According to the feds, the brothers also, until recently, ran websites that propped up fraudulent online financial scams. Law enforcement officials last year seized nearly $500 million from the brothers, money that prosecutors say was derived from the wire fraud. The Krasensteins, who have not been charged with any crimes, maintained that they did nothing wrong or illegal. The brothers remain extremely popular in corners of the anti-Trump left, having parlayed their vehement, often conspiratorial opposition to the president into social media fame, with well over 1 million followers between them. They also run the standalone news websites Independent Reporter and Hill Reporter, where, like Twitter, their brand of hashtag resistance, a label that they eschew, but which aptly fits their frequent calls for the impeachment and prosecution of the president, has galvanized Trump critics. But it has also drawn the scrutiny of criticism of progressive activists who see the Krasensteins as opportunists distracting from a more productive message, while others have been accused of using the anti-Trump resistance to line their own pockets. The Krasensteins have a documented history of involvement with shady internet get-rich-quick schemes, a history that one federal financial investigator had reason to believe amounted to a criminal conspiracy. There is a lot of money to be made, says Nomiki Konst, a progressive activist and journalist, in building up the sorts of online followings enjoyed by the Krasenstein brothers. Konst, a former surrogate for Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign and an investigative reporter for the Young Turks, told the Daily Beast that a lot of people realized they can get a lot of airtime talking about impeaching Trump rather than talking about solutions that will help everyday Americans. So, when it comes to what these brothers do, basically, their whole, or what they did, I guess, when they were on Twitter, apparently they run some, I guess, journalistic publications. I guarantee they're not journalistic. But, other than that, but when it came to what they did on Twitter, basically their MO, their modus operandi was basically on Twitter to anything Trump did, they posted. So if Trump, let's just say Trump, obviously, he was involved in whatever, all the Russiagate stuff. So let's say whatever, he's Putin's puppet. They would constantly go out there and talk about, oh my God, you're Putin's puppet. Oh my God, you're so corrupt, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not surprising coming from the resistance. So the followers of the resistance and all the people that are anti-Trump. But then there would be situations where Donald Trump, he would be like, pushing for like wars. He would be pushing for like, invading Venezuela, or he would be against like trade deals, or he would be in favor of peace with North Korea. He would, he would do other, he would maybe. There was another report recently where he released some nonviolent drug offenders. So like basically all the even like very small, tiny good things that Trump would do, these would be the kind of people that would basically go against it, even if they were good things. That's all their role was. Their role was just to be anti-Trump, just to be anti-Trump. So they wanted to get famous and rich, apparently, off of just being anti-Trump. All day, every day, 24/7, 365. That was their modus operandi. And they wanted to operate on that, and they wanted to get famous off that. And it worked. Because I don't know if it mentions it here somewhere. It probably does. But they had one of them had 700,000 followers. The other one had 900,000 followers. So, and then I remember at one point when I was on Twitter, I think I had my old account, my old Twitter account, which, that also got suspended because I was going at it with a bunch of anti-Bernie trolls. They had been following, I think one of, I don't know which one's Ed or Brian, whichever, they were following me on my old account. Now, at the time I wasn't very familiar with who on Twitter is good and who on Twitter is bad. These days I'm very, very picky about who I follow on Twitter. I've had to get rid of a lot of my Twitter followers, or the people, that I was following at least. I've had to get, just unfollow a lot of people that I just had no reason to follow because I never saw anything on their timelines being interesting or anything that they tweeted to be really all that worth following. So I was like, whatever. So why should I follow them? So right now I kind of have it around the 2,000-ish mark. Before that it was probably 2,500 maybe, or maybe somewhere around maybe a little higher than that. But I got rid of a lot of people, and I did that for my last account too. But then obviously I got my account deleted, so I didn't get around to kind of finishing the job for my older account. But when it came to my newer account, I have done that, and I'm very, very picky with it. And so, but these were the kind of people that were like, I definitely wouldn't want to follow, but I was following them before. But so my point is that when I was following them at one point, they were following me. So that's what happens. Like, I followed them, then they would follow me back. So they did a lot of that kind of like, I follow you, you follow me back. It's always a follow back kind of things coming from certain accounts that, like, whenever there's a follow back thing, like there's a kind of follow back, like, kind of like stipulation there, you always kind of like, I don't know. To me, it kind of raises a red flag where it's like, okay, that's a little weird. Like, how are you so okay with following somebody? Like, if they're not like, but I don't know, if they're not putting out anything out there that's interesting. But that's just my opinion. I mean, that's just the way I operate, so maybe that's just my mentality. But it's just with some accounts, though, like, they'll follow anybody. They'll just follow anybody that follows them. I don't know. To me, that's just weird. But listen, man, do what, people want to do whatever they want, they can do it. I'm just giving my perspective on that. But yeah, I always found that a little weird but I guess what I'm trying to say is the fact that they would follow people so easily is probably because they tried to scam them. So they want to be like, here, let me follow this person, and then maybe I can get them to get involved in one of my investment scams, and I can, get them to, I don't know, check my website out and stuff like which, checking my website out is fine. But I mean, when it comes to the point where you're getting involved in fraud, that becomes a problem. So, I mean, and it's, it's understandable that they would want to get rid of these accounts because these accounts are specifically doing things that are, I mean, they're trying to scam people, and that's just not right. So, I don't think you should exist on social media if you're doing those kind of sneaky things. Here it says, long before they took up the hashtag resistance mantle, the Krasensteins began hawking dubious investment advice way back in 2003 on a pair of internet forums, selling ads to online money-making operations that included a number of apparent scams, including some run by people later convicted on charges ranging from fraud to capital murder. Wow, that's interesting. So see, they're selling ads to online money-making operations. So if they're doing that, why wouldn't they, why wouldn't they scam regular people on Twitter that they're following or, that are following them? They would do the same exact thing. It's not surprising. It says, according to prosecutors, the services of the Krasensteins promoted on their websites duped thousands of investors into funding Ponzi scheme type scams, and even resulted in some downloading a virus that emptied their accounts on an anonymous online payment platform used by the Krasensteins themselves before it was shut down as part of a major federal money laundering investigation. The case received some national coverage after the Krasensteins' home was raided, but the full extent of the case against them and the details of their controversial business ventures has not been previously reported. The Krasensteins insist that they were victims of the ordeal. They claimed they had no knowledge of the illegal activities of the companies to which they sold ads, and that their right to sell such ads is protected by both the First Amendment and a federal law removing legal liability from online publishers. Their investments advisory sites, they say, were no different from ad platforms hosted by Google and other online advertising giants. In fact, they insist they were more consumer friendly because they say they helped people avoid scams. It says here, this is quoting an email from Ed Krasenstein. It says, the myth out there that we promoted financial scams is false. We did not promote anything. Our website was filled with warnings and notices about sending money to any website which anyone saw advertised on their websites. The entire purpose was to help people find out which online business opportunities were legitimate and which were not. I mean, that seems kind of strange. So the exact thing that they're accusing you and charging you with, that the government or the authorities essentially are charging you with, you're saying that you were doing the complete opposite. You were trying to give people the, trying to warn people of the scams that they might get involved in. I don't know. To me, that seems kind of strange. It seems like a very convenient response to just be like, no, we're the victims and we're the ones trying to help everybody out, even though we're being convicted or being charged with doing the complete opposite. It's a pretty lengthy article. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here. The rest of the article just pretty much talks about. Let me just read this last part here, kind of halfway through the article. It says, federal prosecutors did not see it that way. In a civil asset forfeiture complaint filed last August, Homeland Security Special Agent Michael Adams wrote that the brothers were paid huge sums by online scammers engaged in illegal activities. Yeah, so it's the exact opposite of what you claim it is. Whatever they're saying, it's kind of ironic, too, because the same way that they deal with Trump, opposing everything he opposes, even if it's a good thing that Trump pushes for, they just oppose it anyway. So in this case, which Ed Krasenstein is responding by saying, no, we're doing the complete opposite of what you're accusing us of doing. So it's ironic that whatever they are against or they're responding to, they're responding with the exact opposite response. Yeah, that's very, very convenient and very, very, very comical. So the rest of the article just talks about how, I don't know, they were involved in different scams with different, I don't know what these are, companies or groups or something. Yeah, it just kind of goes into the detail of their operations. If you guys want to check out the article, I'll post it in my description box down below, and you can check it out. So, to that point, there's another article from the New York Times. This one is about somebody named Michael Avenatti, who got charged with stealing nearly $300,000 from his client. And his client is somebody you guys might recognize. Her name is Stormy Daniels. This is somebody, so this Stormy Daniels was a pornographic actress. She was acting in porn until I don't know what date or when she stopped. But anyway, at some point she ended up accusing Donald Trump of sexually harassing her and sexually assaulting her. He was her lawyer. And apparently, according to this New York Times article, which I will not get into because the story is actually pretty straightforward. He basically stole $300,000 from her and then spent it for his own. He spent it for his own expenses. And maybe we can. Maybe let's just read the first part here. It says. Read the first couple paragraphs here. It says, federal prosecutors on Wednesday charged the celebrity lawyer Michael Avenatti with misappropriating hundreds of thousands of dollars belonging to a former client, the pornographic film actress Stormy Daniels. The indictment announced by the United States Attorney's Office in Manhattan marks the disintegration of a relationship that propelled Mr. Avenatti to national prominence and adds to his mountain of legal troubles as he stands accused of more than 36 crimes in California and New York. Mr. Avenatti is accused of taking more than $295,000 from Miss Daniels, who is named in the indictment as victim 1. So there must be more victims, huh? And was identified as the actress by a person with knowledge of the case. After helping her secure a book contract last year, according to charges, Mr. Avenatti sent a fraudulent and unauthorized letter bearing Miss Daniels' signature to her literary agent, demanding that a portion of the book advance be wired to a client trust account he controlled. Wow. And it says Mr. Avenatti is accused of putting the money toward his personal expenses, including plane tickets, hotel stays, meal delivery, dry cleaning, and a monthly payment on a Ferrari. Jesus Christ. It says Mr. Avenatti denied all of the charges against him on Wednesday and said he looked forward to fighting them in court. Quote, at no time was any money misappropriated or mishandled. He told the New York Times, saying that any funds related to the book were part of his representation agreement. Quote, she received millions of dollars worth of legal services, and we spent huge sums in expenses, he added, referring to Miss Daniels, whom he said he had not represented since February. She directly paid only $100 for all that she received? Wow. So is he saying that she owed him more? Huh. Well, anyway. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, this guy was clearly scamming her. So now, what you guys may be wondering, the connection is between the Krasensteins that I was just talking about and Michael Avenatti, is that Michael Avenatti was also somebody that was viewed by the hashtag resistance as being like this big hero for the whole anti-Trump movement, because obviously he was representing a woman that was accusing, and this is one of many, I don't know how many women have accused Donald Trump of sexual assault and sexual harassment, but she just happens to be one of many. And, this guy's, representing her, but, it just basically, because Kyle from Secular Talk covered it and covered this whole kind of thing that happened, regarding Avenatti, and he played the clip of all these different media outlets and channels and networks and stuff fawning over him, bringing him on interviews and saying, "Oh my God, thank God for Michael Avenatti. He's a savior and he's going to take down Trump. And, it's so great to have you on. And you're the next big thing. And you're my sleeper to run for president." I mean, again, the guy didn't have any political views. I mean, all he was anti-Trump. And these people are talking about how he's going to run for president. That's how embarrassing our media has become. And as many of you know, our media is obviously very pathetic and very much an embarrassment. But when you get down to like specific examples, it's just sad. It's sad how much, they're going to fawn over specific like media figures, or I'm sorry, in this case, a lawyer. I mean, he's not even a media figure, but he would appear in so many, so many segments on so many channels that he might have well become a media figure. And I don't think he ever put out a policy idea that he believed in. He never put out any kind of indication that he wanted to run, but everybody was talking about him as if he was going to run. It was so embarrassing. But basically, the general argument I'm trying to make here is that these resistance grifters, hashtag resistance grifters, are all about upping their own status, making themselves more famous, making sure they get more attention than anybody else, and they want people fawning over them. They would love to get that attention, love to become famous. I mean, look at this guy. According to the charges that were pointed out in the New York Times article, he was he was spending all the money that he got, that he basically wired to a specific account, a trust account of his. He was using that on plane tickets, hotel stays, meal delivery, dry cleaning, driving around a Ferrari. I mean, she's a monthly payment on a Ferrari. Jesus, man. I mean, talk about living the high life. So, I mean, but these people ultimately, they don't care about politics. They don't care about actually pushing for policies. Certainly Avenatti wasn't. I mean, to their credit, the Krasensteins obviously did have a political ideology, but at the same time, they were pushing fraud scams, And, like I said, Kyle from Secular Talk talked about this, he actually talked about both Avenatti and Krasenstein, but he talked about them in separate segments. I'm just making the connection between them because they're both involved in the whole hashtag resistance movement. But he was talking about, and this is kind of like just a side thing that I just wanted to throw out there for you guys to think about, is the whole idea of free speech and how getting rid of the Krasensteins from Twitter, because they got the Krasensteins basically got kicked off Twitter for this, the charges that were put against them, and Kyle, he made a good point and said, this should be considered as a free speech issue because you're silencing somebody for doing something that, doesn't deserve that ultimate treatment. So as far as like getting kicked off of Twitter, because you were involved in this scam, you shouldn't get kicked off Twitter. I disagree, because you're doing something unethical in the sense that, and it has to do with your political thing. So it has to do with like what didn't have to do with like bringing people onto their like political websites or something, or like getting them to like click on links and then, get them involved in, financial scams and stuff, which they claim was helping people to avoid financial scams. So it was way too much. There was way too much like opportunism there, and way too much like sneakiness that you can't trust. And they need to get called out for that. I don't see, and not only do they have to get called out for that, but they have to be kept from doing it further and from gaining more of that status. Trust me, I understand the issue of free speech. I get it. The free speech issue is very, very important when you get down to the, nitty gritty of it. And this could certainly be seen as a free speech issue. But when your free speech gets to the point of promoting scams and promoting fraud, then it becomes an issue. Then you have to really start considering, like, should these people be given? Should they be given this platform to promote those kind of frauds and scams? No, they don't. I definitely don't think they deserve that. And and let's just say if Michael Avenatti was on Twitter, I don't think he would deserve to get kicked off Twitter for getting involved in what he was doing, because he wasn't using social media to up his stats. He was just going on regular media all the time. So the funny thing is now he probably won't be brought on mainstream media all the time. If anything, I doubt the mainstream media, as far as like all those networks and stuff, I guarantee they won't talk about it. By the way, there was one thing I wanted to mention about Avenatti. One last thing about, before I finish off this segment, is Avenatti was also caught for scamming Nike. So he was involved in some sort of dealing with the Nike. Obviously a big corporation known for making sports gear, shoes, shirts, equipment, sports equipment and stuff. So he was actually trying to scam them, and federal authorities caught him when he was like ready to like get involved in some sort of deal with them, and he was trying to screw them over or something. And then he apparently just got caught right there. So the people that were pretending to represent Nike or something, they caught him right on the spot, and they were like, "Oh, you're arrested, buddy." So they ended up catching Avenatti, and he was arrested for that. He was trying to scam them for, I think, $1 million or $3 million or something. I don't know. No, probably more than that. I forgot. There was an article from New York Times a couple months ago. I posted it on my Facebook page a little while back, and I wrote about it, gave my take on it. But he apparently tried to do that too. If you want, I can post that in the description box as well for you guys if you want to check that out. But yeah, Avenatti, Krasensteins, these are all scam artists. These people are all part of this fake resistance movement, stupid, resistor movement where they just want to like get famous off of being anti-Trump and representing, a porn star who's, accusing Trump of fraud or accusing Trump of sexual harassment and stuff. Then it turns out that this guy is trying to defraud his client. And then these other brothers are, defrauding regular people with their websites and their financial scams. And they pretend that they were actually trying to help people get away from financial scams. It's just all smoke and mirrors, man. This shit it's all covered up by these rich assholes that think they can get away with anything and everything. And it's good to see them get caught for it. And, if they have to suffer the brunt of being, kicked off of social media or whatever, then that's just what you have to deal with. All right. So the next story that I want to cover for you guys, and we've been covering this, fairly extensively. Certainly been talking about him for the last few episodes for sure. This is definitely an issue that I care about very much. So Julian Assange, as we reported last week, he got, he obviously got arrested. So he got arrested, I think it was in April, I believe. April 11th, I believe, or April 12th. He got arrested in the UK. He was in the UK, I believe it was the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK, and he ended up, after years of being in that Ecuadorian embassy and starving and, being held, kept in a certain small room where he could never even leave. He has been arrested, taken to the UK, taken in by UK authorities, and this is after, again, like I said last week. So yeah, like I said, like I covered last week, he has been charged with 17 counts of the Espionage Act by the United States. But the United States, luckily, which is a good thing, the United States has not captured him yet. But unfortunately, the UK is doing the United States' dirty work for them, and they are treating him horribly from what reports are coming out apparently from his lawyer and as well as a lot of independent reporters. So I'm just going to read this article here from NBC News. The title says, Julian Assange is showing symptoms of psychological torture, expert says. The Wikileaks founder, quote, lives in constant panic. Imagine being in a nightmare and never waking up, according to the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. That was the subheadline of the article. So let me just go through this a little bit here. It says Julian Assange has been left in a state of extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and constant panic after spending 7 years holed up in London's Ecuadorian embassy. A leading United States nations expert who visited the WikiLeaks co-founder in prison said Thursday. Niles Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, on torture, told NBC News he blames the United States, United Kingdom, and Sweden for ganging up on Assange and subjecting him to psychological torture and collective persecution while he was inside the embassy. You talk with him and he is extremely agitated. He had all these questions. What's going on there? What is in this legal proceeding? And what's going to happen here? The UN official who has been working informally with Assange's legal team said. He's so preoccupied that he will bombard you with questions without waiting for answers, Melzer said. Assange fled to the embassy in 2012 to avoid extradition to Sweden to face allegations of rape and sexual assault. Critics pointed out he was free to walk outside and face justice whenever he wanted. But Assange and his supporters claim he was forced into exile to avoid extradition to the U.S., a belief supported by Melzer. Assange is currently being held at London's high-security Belmarsh prison, having been hauled out for the embassy, being held out of the embassy in April and sentenced to 50 weeks for skipping bail. The U.S. has since announced it is charging Assange with 17 counts under the Espionage Act of 1917, which critics say has potential free speech limitations. In a telephone interview, Melzer said that if Assange is extradited to the U.S., he faces what amounts to ill treatment or torture, such as prolonged isolation, sensory deprivation, and solitary confinement. He faces up to 175 years in prison if convicted of all charges. Quote, there is this intelligence cooperation between Sweden and the U.S., which is very important for Sweden and their own defense strategy since they evolved away from neutrality in the 1990s. Melzer said, Sweden has been very forthcoming in cooperating with the U.S. in those years. Asked by NBC News to respond to the allegation that its investigation of Assange was disproportionate, the Swedish prosecutor's office declined to comment. By the way, a lot of the charges that are being accused, or that are being made against Julian Assange just in Sweden alone. So when it comes to the rape charges or apparently he raped an underage girl or something, apparently those are bullshit. From everything that I've heard, there's been nothing that shows actual legitimate evidence of that actually happening. A lot of it is just, it's made up, and they just think it's a way for critics. I think a lot of critics out there, they just think that it's a way for Assange to suffer more persecution and more, blowback for the great things that he's done as far as exposing the U.S. government, and I think to many extents, the UK government, and just like exposing a lot of corruption that has gone on all over the world. So all these different countries, like they said, Sweden has worked with the United States very much in making sure that he gets punished and everything. So that's why they're making these charges. Obviously, the U.S. charged him with the Espionage Act. The UK has him, in solitary confinement. They arrested him, put him in solitary confinement. So everybody's making sure that Assange suffers as much as possible for the fact that he exposed corruption, which is amazing. I mean, I can't even believe that that's being allowed. Let's see, and it's also a good point to point out that the Swedish prosecutor's office declined to comment on the story because they know, I guarantee they know deep down that those rape charges against him are bullshit. So if they have to respond for that, they don't want to like get into the details of it because they know, because they know it's baseless. There's nothing there to actually make a case against Assange other than the fact that he again exposed corruption. And they agreed with the United States that we're gonna make sure to throw the book against this guy, and then America obviously supports that and they're okay with that. So anything to make sure a free speech hero and an actual journalist is basically tortured and put through hell for what he did. It says here, the investigation of sexual assault against Assange expired in 2015 because it exceeded the statute of limitations. The investigation of rape was dropped in 2017 because officials said it was impossible to pursue Assange while in exile. They reopened that case after his arrest last month. How the hell are you allowed to do that? If the statute is gone, how can you reopen it again? How weird. On Thursday, Assange missed a court hearing because his lawyer said he was too ill to appear by video link. Melzer visited him on May 9th, accompanied by 2 medical professionals specializing in the impact of torture on detainees. He shows it says he, quote, shows all the signs that are typical for a person who has prolonged exposure to psychological torture, including extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and intense psychological trauma, Melzer said. You can see that that's someone who lives in a constant state of panic. Basically, it's a bit like imagine being in a nightmare and never waking up. The UN rapporteur, I don't know how to say that word, is also a professor of international law at the University of Glasgow, which is in Scotland, human rights chair of the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights, and previously worked as an advisor to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Yeah, what a good guy. It's quite a good resume right there. So it's good that he's representing Assange. A good person representing another good person. It says, in a UN statement released Friday, Melzer said he believes there has been a, quote, unrestrained campaign of public mobbing, intimidation, and defamation by the United States, Ecuador, and Sweden to get Assange extradited to the U.S. Other experts say that Sweden's reopening of the rape case complicates this supposed aim. What do you mean complicates? That just means, if anything, that reiterates the aim. It says Melzer has written to all 4 governments asking them to refrain from further disseminating, investigating, or tolerating statements or other activities prejudicial to Assange's human rights and dignity. Dignity. In 20 years of work with victims of war, violence, and political persecution, I have never seen a group of democratic states ganging up to deliberately isolate, demonize, and abuse a single individual for such a long time. Yeah, that's a pretty crazy thing that's happening. That's quite a development for Assange, and I kind of had that fear because all the way since the time that he was in that Ecuadorian embassy, apparently he was really being kept, in very, very difficult, conditions. Apparently he wasn't, able to eat very much or drink very much. I think that I heard some stories about that. So yeah, if that's, shit, if it's to the point it is now that they're saying it is, that's pretty bad, because not only is his arrest a violation of free speech, First Amendment, all that stuff. I mean, First Amendment obviously is in America, so I don't know if other countries care about the First Amendment, but or as far as, freedom of speech. But in general, free speech is under threat, regardless of how you want to look at it, when it comes to the arrest of Assange. And the fact that, these countries like Sweden, even Ecuador, the fact that they're willing to take part is very unfortunate and they should be called out for it. And, there's a lot of protests going on. I'm not sure where they're coming from. I know a lot of them are coming out of the UK for sure. But wherever these protests are taking place, they're definitely taking place in a lot. They're definitely taking place a lot more in European countries. I wouldn't be surprised if they were taking part in Sweden as well. But there's a lot of people, regular people, not government, the heads of governments. At least I think the only head of government, or at least the most prominent head of government that I can remember that spoke out in favor of Julian Assange, and I'm saying like specifically mentioning Assange, was the leader of the opposition in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn, who's trying to become Prime Minister of the UK. And he's the only person that has really, the only prominent person out there, prominent politician, prominence, not just politician in general, because there's other politicians in America like Tulsi Gabbard and Mike Gravel and all the, Bernie Sanders, he gave a very, very tepid response regarding the charges being brought against Assange. I don't think he actually mentioned Assange's name, but he did say something about the actual violation of free speech, which is good. But Bernie's response was very tepid compared to Tulsi Gabbard, who said she would, Tulsi said if she was president, she would actually pardon Julian Assange, would pardon, Edward Snowden and everything, so. I mean, there's certain people that just have the balls to stand up for those things. Now, if you stand up for those things, in the United States, you're basically portrayed as being like pro-Trump and anti-United States, and it's like total fear-mongering. And especially with the fact that Assange exposed Hillary Clinton during the 2016 elections and showed, various cables and stuff, and, showed her speeches that she gave and statements that she made that she didn't want to be released and everything, stuff about the DNC and whatnot, and everything about like Seth Rich, who, as we discussed, I think it was last week, about how Seth Rich was, he was basically identified by Julian Assange to be the person that gave the information about the DNC corruption and stuff. And which, if many of you, may not know, Seth Rich was a former operative that was working for the DNC, and he apparently exposed the DNC, or apparently spoke out against the DNC, about the corrupt things that they were doing, and then gave information to WikiLeaks and Assange. Assange, again, identified him as being that, and then he was found dead. He was found dead, shot in Washington, D.C., but then his, none of his possessions that were on him were taken. So apparently somebody just randomly shot him and just ran away without taking his wallet, without taking apparently an expensive watch he had on, and yeah, so a lot of questions surrounding Seth Rich's death. A lot of questions, obviously about the DNC's corruption and everything. But so my point is that when people come out in favor of what Julian Assange did and exposing the DNC and stuff, they're seen as like, well, you're anti-democratic party, and because Trump said thank you WikiLeaks or whatever, I think he said that in 2016 about how WikiLeaks exposed Hillary Clinton. So now everybody claims that Julian Assange was pro-Trump. That was never the case. Julian Assange has never been pro-Trump. Just because Trump says he loves Julian Assange or WikiLeaks or whatever does not mean that WikiLeaks loves him. And the fact that Donald Trump's current American government, U.S. government is charging Julian Assange with 17 counts of the Espionage Act on baseless terms, as I detailed in the last episode last week. That completely disproves any claim that that Julian Assange is pro-Trump. Just because he exposes Hillary Clinton does not automatically make him pro-Trump. And just because Trump says he loves WikiLeaks doesn't mean that WikiLeaks loves him. So it makes no sense. So all these people that are making these claims, it's just Like, it's a bunch of just bullshit. But anyway, but the psychological and physical torture, all these things the potential psychological and physical torture that Julian Assange is going through based on what this gentleman said, is very scary. And I hope Julian Assange is going to be okay. It's very unfortunate what's happening to our free speech advocates out there, to people that are standing up for these things that a lot of, honestly, that our own government won't stand up for, whether it's journalists that are being journalists like Julian, it's not real journalists that are being detained, whether it's journalists that are part of like mainstream or whatever various publications and whatnot, whether they're going through it or whatever. It's horrible, because at the end of the day, free speech is everything in this country, for sure. I mean, that's so important for the fabric of this society. And hopefully Jeremy Corbyn becomes prime minister, because if he does, then he's gonna. I think there's definitely going to be a possibility that he would basically try and maybe put Julian Assange in kind of a protective exiling, so that he's not, so he's not basically extradited to the U.S. and all that stuff, because Jeremy Corbyn is not fond of the United States, never has been. Him and Bernie Sanders are very similar ideologically wise, and I don't know if Bernie Sanders would refuse to like charge Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, all those types of people, those whistleblowers and stuff. But Bernie Sanders definitely does believe in free speech to some extent. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does if he were to become president, if he were to, he were to be the nominee, and, something were to happen to Julian Assange, what he would say and stuff. So again, he didn't give a very good response to the Julian Assange, charges, and he just kind of mentioned free speech and freedom of press to kind of in a general standpoint. He never said Assange's name, as far as I know. So we'll see what happens with Assange. I hope for the best for him. I hope he doesn't go through any more torture than he already is. We need him around. We definitely need his existence out there, so that he can put the pressure on more on journalism and more countries to stop the corruption that they're taking part in, because they obviously think they can get away with it. And the less Julian Assanges we have out there, the more they're going to be getting away with stuff, and the more they're going to know that they can do whatever they want and nobody's going to call them out. So here's to, knock on wood that he's going to be okay. So progressives and, libertarians and left libertarians and libertarian socialists, all those people out there that are, in favor of freedom and in favor of freedom of speech, free press and all that stuff, we're going to be backing and supporting Julian Assange the whole way. So there's an article that was written by a establishment. I don't know what he is. I think he's a reporter, or not journalist, reporter, whatever he is. But he's very anti-Trump. Obviously anti-Trump, but also anti-Bernie in many cases too. But he wrote an article for the New York Magazine? Yeah. So the name of the author is Jonathan Chait. I know him as Jonathan Chait. He has been in mainstream media for many times, for a long time. Has gone on a lot of networks, MSNBC, CNN, all that stuff. So, but he did an article about the mainstream media, I guess, to a large extent, the mainstream media, and he covered how Donald Trump has a hatred for this specific reporter. Her name is Maggie Haberman. And Jonathan Chait is asking, why does the left hate Maggie Haberman? So the title of the piece is, of course, Trump hates Maggie Haberman. Why does the left? It says, last weekend, New York Times White House reporter Maggie Haberman wrote about the dilemma faced by former communications director Hope Hicks. Facing a subpoena to testify to the House, she wrote, Hicks must choose between ignoring the administration policy of stonewalling investigations and risking her standing with the president and his party, or facing, quote, legal jeopardy, end quote, from Congress. All hell broke loose, as it usually does when Haberman reports a story. In this case, the hell came from the left. Progressive objections to the piece centered on the neutral and arguably uncritical tone it adopted about a decision whether or not to comply with the law. Much of the criticism concerned the headline and the glamorous photo that accompanied it, neither of which is Haberman's responsibility, and the latter of which is a difficult pitfall to avoid when the story's subject came to her job via the modeling profession. Yeah, it's referring to an article from the New York Times. Yeah, that is a pretty nice picture. By the way, Hope Hicks is the former White House communications director. That's what the New York Times article is pointing out here. Continuing on with the Chait article, it says, the piece was not the best specimen of Haberman's work, but the response to it did illustrate the extraordinary and almost pathological hatred her name provokes. The attacks began with the story's decision premise, with the story's, quote, decision premise, and quickly spread to reviving claims that Haberman herself habitually regurgitates administration propaganda. Critics claimed that Haberman's mother, a public relations agent, compromises her ability to report independently, called her a monster, and so on. The left-wing HuffPost media critic Ashley Feinberg has included Haberman on both her list of cowards, courtiers, strivers, and suck-ups, and her list of thinnest skins in the media. Haberman can be hated both for her work and the fact that she disagrees with the hatred of her work, a wonderfully perpetual cycle of content generation. One of the oddities of the left's Haberman hatred is its failure to recognize identical levels of hatred on the right. Haberman has gotten under President Trump's skin like no other reporter. The difference is that the right's loathing for Haberman is rational. No reporter has pried the erratic dysfunctionality of Trump's management style more wide open than her. Haberman began producing searing depictions of Trump's temperamental unfitness during the campaign and continued churning out exposés of his legal travails, from his attempts to fire Robert Mueller to his use of phones that can be easily monitored by Russian or Chinese spies. Her byline alone does not capture the extent of reporting footprint. Haberman's coverage informs the paper's entire coverage of Trump. In the 5 days since her Hicks stories appeared, 3 of which were a holiday weekend, Haberman's co-bylined or contributed reporting to 6 stories. The White House reporting beat, despite its prestige and superficial allure, is a difficult and grinding post. Haberman has not only exceeded any other reporter's coverage of Trump, she has probably covered Trump more thoroughly than any White House reporter has covered any president in history. There's a lot of fawning in this article, isn't there? Seems like Jonathan Chait is trying to promote Haberman as if she should win a fucking award or something here. Accordingly, Trump viscerally loathes Haberman, even as he craves her approval. When Haberman reported last year that Trump's fixer, Michael Cohen, was preparing to flip on his former patron, the president lashed out at her as a third-rate reporter named Maggie Haberman, known as a crooked H flunky, referring to Hillary, who I don't speak to and have nothing to do with. Trump has, in fact, given Haberman several interviews, nearly all of which have yielded a trove of damning quotes. When she helped report on what the Times called a secretive, quote, secretive assault by Mr. Trump on the machinery of federal law enforcement this year, Trump raged against the paper as the true enemy of the people. It is a fallacy to say, as reporters sometimes do, that they must be doing something right if both sides are complaining. It is also fair to concede that some of Haberman's work merits some complaint, but the idea that she is on the whole a failure or an easy mark for the administration is preposterous, and the spreading conspiracy that her mother's professional needs have somehow forced Haberman to suck up to the administration overlooks the fact that the administration obviously despises her. If Haberman's mother's business required her daughter to stay in Trump's good graces, she would have been closed down years ago. The progressive loathing of Haberman draws some of its force from the mistaken belief that the straight news reporters should stand up to the president and call him out for his unfitness to hold office. Some people who believe this fail to grasp the distinction between news gathering and opinion journalism. Others believe Trump's unique authoritarianism and unfitness for office gives straight reporters a special duty to slip the shackles of objectivity. One thing they might consider as they direct this frustration against Haberman is that we know as much as we do about Trump's authoritarianism and fitness for office because of her reporting. So, basically, what Jonathan Chait is saying is that Maggie Haberman is a wonderful reporter. She's done wonderful things. She's exposed Trump. She covers him extensively, done interviews with him where she's called him out and gotten juicy quotes from him. And he claims that people were lashing out at her. I don't know if they did. I'll take his word for it. But apparently they were lashing out at her because she posted a very nice picture of this Hope Hicks person who's I think former communications director for Donald Trump. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really see the point. I wouldn't really see the point in complaining about a picture in an article. I don't really care what picture anybody posts about, at the top of an article. I mean, for the most part, that doesn't mean anything. Maybe, I don't know, she would have posted an uglier picture of that girl. I don't know. But that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the picture says. Let me check this again. So were they complaining about the art? Were they complaining about what she said in the article, or was it just about the picture? It says much of the criticism concerned the headline and the glamorous photograph that accompanied it. Oh, okay, so it's quoting a tweet from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which says, so she's, she's quoting the piece or something. It says, so she's quoting Soledad O'Brien, who's a mainstream reporter. It says this, so referring to the article from Hope Hicks, it says, this is a good example of bias in the New York Times. A picture of a person who is considering not complying with a subpoena is basically a glam shot, and it's framed as a thoughtful, perfectly equal choice. Oh ha, I didn't even realize who wrote it. Imagine having people write about your decision to answer a subpoena as an existential dilemma. The way these journalists treat the potential sources for the next book is not surprising. So I guess what Soledad O'Brien is referring to is getting access. So I think she seems to be making this suggestion here that Maggie Haberman is trying to look for access to Hope Hicks so that she could write like a book about her, or maybe a book about Trump, and then have access to quotes and statements from Hope Hicks. And then AOC responds to what Soledad O'Brien said and said, "Yup, where's the quote no angel take now?" In the immediate aftermath of shootings, media routinely post menacing photos of people of color victims, plus dredge up any questionable thing they'd ever done. But when Hope Hicks considers not complying with a subpoena, it's glamour, shut time. If you're curious about how this behavior and its defensiveness should change, check this person's piece. And then she links to an article about when feminism is white supremacy in heels. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think generally, it's true that, and I don't agree with a lot of the things, if not majority of the things that Soledad O'Brien says, who's just like a Bernie Sanders hater. Can't stand her. But a lot of it does have to do with access, but I mean, a large part of why Haberman is people, and this is not just a Haberman. This is the fact that, you know, the mainstream media in general is so despised that when these days, when even the smallest bit of, you know, let's say in this case they're saying she sucks up, I guess. They're saying that, so I don't know, AOC, I guess, to some extent, or, you know, who was Soledad O'Brien, sucking up to Hope Hicks in this case, or doing propaganda for the Trump administration, even though, and I believe her, or I believe Jonathan Chait saying that she's criticized the Trump administration. I wouldn't be surprised because a lot of the mainstream media doesn't like Trump, but they also do a lot of its propaganda for him as well, especially when he's pushing for, you know, wars and shit, whether it's Venezuela, Iran, whatever. But, yeah, but I can understand, like, the fact that, you know, you're calling this person out for wanting to possibly have access to this specific figure that's part of the Trump, or former part of the Trump administration, and then she wanted to, it says, considering a person who's considering not complying with the subpoena. So she doesn't want to comply with the subpoena that's being given to her. So, people start, like, I don't know, in this case, I guess, Maggie Haberman starts, like, fawning over Hope Hicks or whatever, I guess. So, I mean, that could be the possibility, but at the same time, it's like, listen, dude, I mean, the reason why people, like, so I guess the reason why people, whether it was the HuffPost critic, Ashley Feinberg, whether it's Soledad O'Brien, whether it's AOC, whether or not you agree or disagree with them, at the end of the day, the mainstream media, and again, I don't like Soledad O'Brien, I think she's horrible, but the larger picture of things is the fact that people just can't stand the media these days. The media is so bad. The mainstream media is just constantly doing the bidding of the establishment. They're constantly, you know, just sucking up to whatever the establishment wants, whatever the corporatists want, especially when it comes to Democratic corporatists, you know, the Democratic establishment. They're always sucking up to them, always pushing for everything they want to do, you know, whether it's being anti-Trump just for the case of being anti-Trump, not pushing any actual policies, smearing Bernie Sanders, as I showed you earlier in the past segments in this episode, as I've done in the past segments from other episodes. You know, this constant smearing of, you know, certain people that, you know, are smeared. It's clearly a pattern. So when Jonathan Chait is complaining about, oh my God, how dare you, you smear, you smear Maggie Haberman. Well, why is she being smeared? That's the question. She's being smeared for a reason, or whatever, if you want to call it smear, or she's being attacked or being criticized, whatever, for a specific reason. It's not like we're just doing it, or people are just doing it because it's for fun, you know? It's because the media is sucky at what they do. And you know, why shouldn't we assume that this reporter, in this case Maggie Haberman, is trying to gain access to Hope Hicks, or is trying to gain access to the Trump administration? So, you know, when somebody gets called out for that, I mean, you can make the case that maybe that's a false charge, and that's unfair, and, you know, people shouldn't be making that charge unless it's, you know, actually true, like she's actually trying to do that. But when it comes down to it, a lot of times that's what reporters are doing. So if somebody like Jonathan Chait is complaining about that, don't blame us. Don't blame anybody. Don't really blame anybody for going after a reporter for possibly doing something that they could be doing, because it kind of fits that. It fits that, that MO. It fits that modus operandi of what reporters do, where they do seem to push the narrative of what that administration wants to put out there, and then being, sympathetic to this figure that doesn't want to comply with a subpoena, and all those kind of things. Whether or not she's, maybe she's leaving because she doesn't like Trump anymore, referring to Hope Hicks. Maybe she's leaving the administration and not complying with the subpoena. Well, no, if she's not complying with the subpoena, that means she's doing what would benefit Trump, because I believe it's regarding Russiagate? Something like that. Yeah, it doesn't say. With my congressional subpoena. Okay, it's just a congressional. Whatever the congressional subpoena is, it's probably going to be a detriment to Trump. Because she's going to go out there, and if she were to, comply with the subpoena, then she would have to say, she would have to basically go out there and defend Trump, and or if not expose things about Trump, then maybe Trump doesn't want to be exposed. So, but at the end of the day, it's really important to know that the reason why and I'm definitely speaking for myself, I'm speaking for progressives, and in many cases conservatives, of course, because they hate the mainstream media, but so do progressives, so do leftists, is we're calling out these reporters for doing the same thing they're always doing, which is worrying about access, which is worrying about pushing the narrative of the establishment, pushing the narrative of what the politicians want. In this case, being Trump, whether or not Maggie Haberman has gone after Trump before or not, it's kind of irrelevant. At the end of the day, we have to worry about what these reporters are going to do and what their ulterior motives are going to be. So we have to keep them we have to take them to task and keep an eye out for them and make sure they don't do the same things that they've always been doing. So if we call them out, we're calling them out just to keep them in check and make sure, like, hey, listen, you better not go and, use this, access that you have to Trump to go and push more of your fucking, bullshit propaganda, whether it's, whether or not it's in favor of Trump or against Trump, whatever it is, at the end of the day, depending obviously what you're doing. So if, I don't know, if Maggie Haberman is doing some articles that are anti-Democrats, maybe some are, pro-Democrats, whatever it is, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, it doesn't matter though. At the end of the day, like, as long as you're doing good reporting, that's what's important, So if you're just pushing the constant Russiagate nonsense and, talking about, how, we have to overthrow the government of Venezuela and we have to, go to war with Iran and stuff, like, that's not good reporting. That's shitty reporting. But if you want to talk about, like, stuff regarding, like, the emoluments clause with Trump, as far as, violating those kinds of rules that are under the under the emoluments clause and whatnot in the Constitution, that's fine. Like, there are things that obviously, calling out Trump's corruption as far as money laundering and stuff, which is kind of involved in that whole emolument situation. So that's perfectly fine. So the reporting, it just depends. If these people would do better reporting like Julian Assange does and like Wikileaks does and like Glenn Greenwald and all these great journalists do out there, then you're going to be, you're going to be given that credit, David Sirota and Benjamin Norton and excuse me, Max Blumenthal, Jeremy Scahill, like all these reporters. I mentioned them last week too. I have a lot of their books, up on my shelf over here. Barton Gellman, all these people. Like, these are all Charlie Savage. These people, they're all great reporters, and these are people that are focusing on real issues, not focusing on bullshit stuff that will help them, improve, get their careers, improve their careers, up their careers. They're worrying about what's going on in the country and what people should be focusing on. So I think that's important to call those people out and make sure to hold their feet to the fire and make sure they're doing their jobs right. Okay, guys, that's going to be the end of the Progressive Square today. Thank you so much for tuning in. This was a great show. I was very happy to talk about all these different issues. I basically ended up covering everything that I wanted to cover. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully, my Periscope viewers, my Facebook Live viewers, and also you guys watching the segments on YouTube and Facebook, which I'll be posting. Hopefully you guys will enjoy that as well. So until next time, I just wanted to let you guys know, please go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/progblacksmith, PROGBLACKSMITH. If you guys could contribute and become a patron, I would really appreciate it. Try and keep this show going as much as possible. It would be much appreciated. And I will see you guys next time. Take care.